Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining the webinar. We're going to wait a few more minutes for others to join, and then we'll get started. I've been told there's 180 registered, which is fantastic. So I want to make sure we get most everybody. If you've just joined, we're going to get started in just a minute. We're just going to wait a little bit longer to make sure everybody joins. So I'm looking at 10:02 to get started. All right. Well, welcome to the Food Service Packaging Institute's Maximizing Recycling Goals with Outreach in California, the webinar. My name is Tracy Bills with SCS Engineers, and I will be your moderator for the next hour. A few housekeeping items. First of all attendees are already muted. Use the control panel to the right to change audio and phone settings. Click the arrow to expand the control panel, so up in the right-hand corner there. Use the question box to ask questions during the webinar, and then we will actually answer the questions at the very end of all three presenters. And a recording of the session will be emailed to you this week. One other thing that I'd like to mention is that FPI will be at the CRA conference July 26th to 29th in Oakland at the Marriott City Center. And so they are going to have a networking event. So right after the exhibitor's reception from 7:30 to 9:30 at the conference. So FPI would love for you to join the festivities and chat about recovery opportunities for cups and takeout containers in your community. The reception, the food and drinks are complimentary. So enjoying food and beverage and talking about cup and takeout container recovery sounds pretty fun. With that said, I would like to introduce all three speakers. Our first is Lynn Dyer. Lynn is president of the Food Service Packaging Institute, the trade association for the North American food service packaging industry. At FPI, she advocates for the interests of the industry and champions its efforts to expand recycling and composting of food service packaging. Prior to joining FPI in 1998, Lynn worked with the European Food Service and Packaging Association, now Pack2Go Europe, in Brussels, Belgium. Lynn holds a Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Richmond. Our second presenter, Bob Gettert, is a senior consultant at Resource Recycling Systems, bringing more than 41 years of experience in recycling collection, solid waste facility operations, and management contract administration. Bob is a national leader in pragmatic implementation strategies for zero waste programs. Bob's previous experience includes his position as director of the Austin Resource Recovery, executive director of the California Resource Recovery Association, and chief of commercial operations solid waste division of the city of Fresno in California. Bob is past president of the National Recycling Coalition. And our last speaker, Marissa Segundo. Marissa is a communications consultant for clients of Resource Recycling Systems, also known as RRS. She has nearly 15 years of experience in strategic communications, planning, media relations, and team leadership. As a bilingual communicator, Marissa is proud to be a proactive bridge builder to the Hispanic community. Her recycling communications strategies have earned multiple awards at the local, state, national, and international levels. Marissa is accredited in public relations and lead and is a certified recycling systems manager. So with the introductions completed, we will have Lynn Dyer kick us off. Lynn?
Thank you very much, Tracy. I am so excited to see so many people who have registered and actually signed on to attend the webinar. So if you want to go to the next slide, Marissa, I would appreciate that. So just a little bit of background on the Food Service Packaging Institute. For those of you who might not be aware of who we are, we're actually a trade association specifically for the North American food service packaging industry in North America, and that's really all that we focused on. We've been around for about 85 years. And interestingly, the membership specifically really revolves around the converters of those food service packaging products, as well as their raw material suppliers and the machinery suppliers itself. And then we also invite food service distributors and operators to be part of FPI, and all told, we represent about 90% of the entire industry. So if we want to talk a little bit about food service packaging, just so we can set the landscape here, you know, when we talk about food service packaging, we're talking about that those cups, those takeout containers, cutlery, lids, straws, you name it, that is used by food service establishments for prepared foods and beverages. So we're really focusing specifically on those items that you find in the restaurant industry called front of house. So that's really for food service packaging, that's what we consider. However, when we look specifically at the work that we're doing to get more of our products recycled and composted, there are really kind of four categories that we're working on, and that's specifically cups, including those sleeves that are commonly around paper cups, containers, takeout boxes, and paper bags as well. And I will say that, you know, while we would like to see the recovery of all food service packaging, you know, we're really focusing on these specific materials because we understand, based on some of the research we've done, that, you know, this represents a large volume of the food service packaging that's out there, and a higher likelihood that they're actually going to get recycled and composted properly. So that's just a little bit of background, specifically when we're talking about food service packaging. Marissa, I think we may have skipped a slide. No? Okay, no worries. Let's keep moving then. So if you want to go to the next slide, please. One more after that. So why are we working specifically on doing this? So the goal that we have specifically is we really want to make sure that we are making sure that we're recycling and composting specifically food service packaging products. You know, we want to find a higher and better use for it. And we want to find and develop some of those different options for those specific products. So if you ask specifically why we are doing it, you know, we're really trying to meet the demand specifically for recyclable and compostable, because as you all know, or you probably heard, whether it's policymakers saying that they want to make sure we're using only recyclable or compostable materials, it might be brands that are saying that they want to use recyclable or compostable materials, and really to be able to do that, we need to be able to actually have that infrastructure available to do so. But frankly, we also want to talk about the fact that recycling and composting is there to provide feedstocks to those end markets. So, you know, can these items be used as feedstocks specifically for these end markets? To be honest with you, another reason that we're specifically working on this is that, frankly, we want to show that voluntary industry-based recovery initiatives do work, and that we don't necessarily need government intervention or government-mandated solutions to come in and tell us that we need to do something in a way that may or may not make sense. So, frankly, we feel like from a public policy standpoint, it's helping us as well. The other thing to look at is that we have public officials, whether it's at the federal, state, or local levels, that are have announced various environmental goals, and this may be one way that it could help some of the public officials as well. And then, frankly, we want to talk about that. Frankly, it can make good business sense. It doesn't make sense to bury a valuable product or material when you can recycle it or compost it. So, if we want to go to the next slide, please. So we have been at this, I will tell you, since 2011, and frankly, we've done an awful lot of research specifically around how do you recover food service packaging. And one of the first things that we did was really try to understand, if we want to recover a product, whether it's through recycling or composting, you have to be able to collect it. And so one of the first things we did is try to get a better understanding of where you can actually collect that material. And interestingly enough, what we found was that almost half of food service packaging that we're talking about here actually ends up back in the home. And frankly, we were a little surprised by that. But when you start thinking about it, if you think about a typical quick service restaurant, roughly 70% of their meals leave the store, whether it's through a drive-through or through carry-out or delivery. And ultimately, people then dispose of it in the home. So they might actually eat, get it through the drive-through and then leave the packaging in their car and then ultimately put it in their bin at home. So that really has focused a lot of our efforts specifically in the home arena when you're talking about from a collection standpoint. Of course, in-store is another key piece, but based on a lot of the work that we've been doing, a lot of it's been focused more on the home side. So you'll hear us talk a lot about that residential recycling or residential composting program. Okay, next slide, please. So this is a very, very busy slide, but we really just wanted to highlight for you a lot of the different answers and questions related to what we've been doing since 2011 when we launched this. And really, it's really trying to understand what are those barriers and potential solutions to getting food service packaging recycled or composted. And to be honest with you, in some cases, there are real barriers out there, like end markets, and we'll talk about that. But there are other things like perceived barriers. Like commonly, when we first started talking to different material recovery facilities and communities, they would tell us that they weren't interested in recycling food service packaging because they said there was just too much food contamination on those items. Well, I think that was a perceived barrier because we ended up going out and doing a couple of different studies and looked specifically at food contamination and food residue on food service packaging and compared it to food contamination on other commonly recycled food packaging items. So like think about spaghetti containers or jars or that sort of thing. And what they found was that there was almost no difference between the amount of food residue on both of those. And those items that we would have considered recyclable would have been either food service packaging, excuse me, or regular food packaging. So that's one of the things that we've looked at. Other things we've looked at are, could you, how do these materials flow in a material recovery facility? I won't go through everything here, but lots of information and overviews of these studies are available at recyclefsp.org. Next slide, please. So something to highlight, one of the things we did at the national level is really try to get a better understanding from a national standpoint what percentage of the U.S. population has the ability to recycle food service packaging products. But at the same time, we also did a very targeted look at what percentage of the population in California specifically has the ability to recycle our food service packaging products, and then also took a look at the material recovery facilities specifically in California. So specifically within the MRFs, we ended up surveying about 70 different MRFs, which represented about 80% of the recycling volume in California. And then from the community standpoint, we actually gathered data on every community with over 7,000 plus residents in the state, and that represented about 90% of the state's population. And really what we found was very, very encouraging and also intriguing, I would say. So for example, when you're talking about rigid plastic cups and containers, nearly 3/4 of the responding MRFs said that they accepted these. And then from a community standpoint, it was roughly the same numbers, but there was definitely a broader range. Paper cups and takeout containers, there was a huge discrepancy there where a lot of the MRFs said that they accepted them, but very few of the communities actually said they accepted them. Molded fiber, they were accepted by over 80% of the MRFs, but about half of the communities were actually communicating that. And we saw that exact same thing along with aluminum foil containers. So it pointed out a real discrepancy in terms of what the MRFs said that they would accept and what the communities were actually telling their residents they would be able to recycle. So if you go to the next slide, one of the things that was interesting was we asked the MRFs, why do they not accept food service packaging? And the top two answers that we received were it was too contaminated, and that was the top answer for paper items, molded fiber, and foam food service packaging. and then lacking end markets, and that was the reason given specifically for rigid plastics and aluminum foil food service packaging. So it's interesting, again, end markets, we know that's a critical issue. That was an issue back in 2016. It's an even greater issue, I would say, in 2018. But this discussion of, or the idea that it's too contaminated, you know, we have some data to show that that may not be a case, and that may be more of a perception versus a reality. So if we shift gears here and talk about some of the work that we've done on the composting side, last year one of the things that we did was help to fund a biocycle study that really looked at what kind of we had residential access for curbside organics. And in working with Biocycle, we were actually able to take a look at which communities were accepting organics singularly, but also organics, you know, things like food scraps, but also food service packaging. And so interestingly enough, they found that there were about, you know, 3 dozen curbside organic programs in California. And it was interesting to note where we saw that we had cities that accepted food service packaging versus cities that did not accept food service packaging. And sometimes what we found was they were very, very close by. But of all the different programs, of those 3 dozen that have the residential curbside organics programs, more than 80% of them accepted at least one type of food service packaging. And we did collect data on, I guess, maybe about a dozen different types of items specifically, but we're not going to get into that today. So if we look at the next slide, one of the things too that it was also helpful for us is, in addition to helping to fund the Biocycle study, we also solely funded some work specifically to look at composters. And I should also say that this work was done at the national level, and we're just sharing the information specific to California. But what we wanted to do was really take a look at, you know, where are those cities that are either have programs or don't have programs, and then where are the composters that either accept or don't accept food service packaging. And from our standpoint, it's interesting to note that there are a good number of major communities that are accepting food service packaging near those composters. So if you want to go to the next slide, and I think this is perhaps one of the intriguing images when you start taking a look at overlaying some of the different information in terms of the organics collections that are out there or not out there, as the case may be, as well as whether the community or whether there's a composter nearby. So this just helps to show you visually, at least, there are a good number of major communities, and when I talk about major communities, I'm talking about those communities that have over 50,000 people in population, are actually within a 40-mile radius of a composter. And to be honest with you, that was one of the questions that we had asked in our survey is, you know, from how far away do you actually source some of your material? So it's not unlikely to think that somebody within a 40-mile radius would be willing to transfer something to a composter. So this shows that there are some real opportunities here, specifically in California, to divert organics because there's a composter nearby and they're accepting food service packaging. So that may be something that they want to look at as well. So if you want to go to the next slide, well, I'm going to turn it over to Bob, and Bob has been helping out FPI in its work, specifically in California, and working on, again, recycling and composting of food service packaging. So Bob, I'll turn it over to you.
And greetings to everybody. And carrying the theme on composting and then into recycling, and the next slide there, yes. We've spoken to experts on food service packaging in the composting arena. There's a lot of opportunities regarding California, specifically AB 1826 and its impact on businesses and local communities for the organics diversion laws. And there's also challenges in composting food service packaging. The organic certification, particularly the Organic Materials Review Institute certification process. And there's also interest in anaerobic digestion facilities as well too. But we are exploring the compostability of food service packaging, as Lynn had noted in her slides there. And the next slide. And I spoke with many representatives of communities and MRFs throughout California, and about recycling and about composting of FSP. Many are interested in potentially adding food service packaging, but concerned about the recyclability and compostability of the end and the end markets that are involved. And we're very interested in many of these communities are interested in free resources to assist with resident outreach and education. And as we speak, I'm setting up appointments to talk to communities about these topics. And so if you're interested, just email me or send a note via chat, and I'd be very interested in giving a call to you. Next slide there. The challenges that we're experiencing, very different than previous years, is the China Blue Skies import restrictions. These restrictions took place on March 1st of this year. It impacts many of the grades of plastics, particularly 3 through 7 and mixed paper. There are quality concerns that we're hearing from the MRFs as they try to lower their contamination rate and meet the China standards. And domestic markets also are experiencing quality concerns. And so there's a tremendous opportunity, but a tremendous challenge in reaching those quality standards. It's also poor timing for new materials, and it's difficult to really add new materials when the market is restricting itself in such a manner. But it's a good time to talk about what is recyclable and what isn't. There's an opportunity to rebuild domestic markets, and there's tremendous efforts throughout the nation on new domestic markets and new investments from companies. There's an outreach need to talk to residents to reinforce the quality of the recyclables, because even the domestic markets need that higher quality. So Food Packaging Institute is actively engaging with the supply network to address food service packaging challenges and opportunities, particularly with mixed paper, PET, thermoforms, and polystyrene, encouraging the supply chain to use more recycled content to drive demand for recovered material. So we're working on the pull from the supply chain, and it's very important as we speak to the supply chain, that quality statement comes back up, that there is a need for high quality materials. I interviewed in the last 12 months, I've interviewed 55 of the 67 targeted MRFs in California. These are specifically MRFs in California. And this study reveals that over 70% of the MRFs that were interviewed accept paper cups, molded fiber takeout trays and containers, aluminum foil containers, plastic cups, takeout containers, and clamshells. These are the basics that Lynn mentioned earlier. That is our target list. It represents most of the food service packaging out there from fast food industry. Our interviews from the 55 targeted MRFs revealed that there's a wide variety of food service packaging that is accepted by the MRFs, and many communities that feed the material into those MRFs do not offer the same acceptance list on their websites. Most of the MRFs desire the community to mimic their accepted recyclables list and want more communications with their communities. So I'm strongly encouraging that stronger communication link of what is your receiving MRF accepting and what is your community saying that it accepts, and try to mirror the list there. The MRF operators are really focused on quality, as I've noted, and very clear messaging, not a smaller list of recyclables, but a clearer list of what is recyclable and what isn't recyclable. That's what I'm hearing. I just talked to a MRF operator yesterday, and that's exactly what that operator said. More clear messaging to the public. So opportunities, we're looking at greater communications between the MRFs and the communities on accepted recyclables, and aligning the MRF and the community materials so residents aren't confused and MRFs receive more quality recyclables. Part of that is listing items that are acceptable or not, so that there's clarity to the public, and trying to eliminate that wish recycling where residents are confused, and so when in doubt, they're throwing it in the blue bin. And we're advising communities for clear graphics, and we offer a package that Marissa is going to be speaking to on community messaging.
Great. Thanks,
And with
Bob.
that, with that, it's Marissa's time.
Thanks, Bob. This is as you saw in the earlier slides, that a lot of research has gone over the past 5 years ahead of this. And one of the main things we did in 2016 was we knew that communication was going to be a big piece of communities that want to add food service packaging to their recycling and composting programs. And how could we best speak to their in their terms, basically speaking in their terms, as far as when we're adding cups, containers, boxes, and paper bags. A lot of times as recycling educators, we tend to use jargon and terms that are industry terms. And so we wanted to reach out to them directly. So we did a web-based survey in 2016 with panelists that were about 1,000 panelists. That was a statistically significant national sample of homeowners over 18 of both males and females, and showed them images and gave them instructions that are commonly found on recycling education materials. And I'm going to show you some of the results on that and how that could be translated into your programs. So first off, we want to know where people were getting their information. What were the relied upon resources where people were going when they wanted to know what was recycled? We also wanted to recreate the point of, at that moment, that decision-making moment when they're at the trash can and the recycling container or compost container where they are going to deposit this item. So what you see in front of you is a chart that says basically that websites were the first and most relied on resource for where people were getting their where they're getting their information about recycling. And you'll notice that this is also divided in different age groups. So social media, as we're all aware, is an integral part of our lives. And for the age group 18 to 34, social media was actually a higher percentage, but still did not surpass the website. So it's important. The big takeaway from that is remembering that our website should be clear, should have images, and should be updated and easy to navigate. So the other education item that we all tend to use is some type of education flyer. And we took 3 different popular styles of flyers. You can see one, in the first example, it has recycling, compost, and garbage all in the same flyer. And the items are just kind of all around. And then on the second image, you have items that are classified for recycling by category, and then a small piece on the bottom that talks specifically about how to prepare your recyclables. And the third just has individual items kind of scattered throughout with yeses, or with the no items on the side. What we found, and the instruction was they were showed an image of a plastic sandwich container, and were asked which flyer was most clear in finding out how to recycle this container, where it goes. And 85% of the residents said that this flyer too was clearest. And what we did with this particular model too is that we did A and B testing, where we took just the top half of the flyer where it didn't include the how to prepare your recyclables, and we found better results from people who not only chose this flyer, but chose the flyer that had the deeper results on how to prepare your recyclables. So we would, a takeaway from that is to maybe to include a little piece on that forethought that people should do before they bring their recyclables or compost to the cart, how they can actually prepare these items. And we saw a lot of really good examples of this in California, where you're using images in a lot of places. You're categorizing the recyclables and composting into categories. I think that helps to really make it more clear for the resident. We want to make it clear. We want to make it visual. So moving on, we also did that A and B testing, meaning that half of the respondents saw one set of instructions and the other half saw another set of instructions. So pizza boxes are always an interesting item where people they tend to not be sure about whether they can recycle it or not. But according to the 10 largest U.S. Markets for OCC, or old corrugated cardboard, they suggest that only one of these three pizza boxes are actually not acceptable. And it's that top one with the cheese residue, because the MRFs and the end markets don't want the food inside of it, but they want the actual, it's a good cardboard. So we tested this where half the respondents saw instructions that said no food soiled, and the other half saw clean pizza box. And the biggest difference was the positive, the people that saw that clean pizza box were likely to recycle those bottom two examples rather than the top one. So we want to make sure that the appropriate items end in the appropriate container. Of course, that top one could be composted in most programs. We also really wanted to focus, and this is an industry focus as well, and before this this national survey, we also looked at so many so many examples of what we were using throughout the industry, and the focus on empty and clean and empty, it has been a big item that people have looked at. So we showed them, how do we get from this full cup that has ice and soda in it to an empty cup? And we had asked them, once again, we didn't A and B test this one, but the results was 40% of the respondents preferred the instructions that cups should be empty and clean. And we also gave them options of using just the word clean alone, and that they really needed empty and clean together. Clean and empty alone wasn't as conclusive as having clean and empty together when you're referring to recycling cups. So what do we, how do we wrap this up? And granted, I'm gonna, this was a very short summary of what our resident messaging survey results were. I encourage you to go to that. Well, you'll learn about it in a moment, the Recycle, FSP, and CA, to see the entire results. But most programs have flyers, as we saw, and best practices would be to group those, use images and group those by categories. Social media, as we discussed earlier, is a common source of information, but don't forget to drive that traffic back to your website. Have your website updated with clear images and easy to navigate, and then also keeping with that language to find out, speak in their terms rather than speaking in your terms. So I wanted to talk for a moment about our Community Partners program. In 2017, FPI launched 3 community partner cities in cooperation with their local MRFs and end markets, where cups, containers, boxes, and paper bags are accepted. And each community, we basically went to the communities after we had already confirmed with the MRF and end markets that this was a good fit to add the cups, containers, boxes, and paper bags to their program. So we would sit down with the community and talk about their goals for communication in a communication refresh and what that looks like. So for some people, it was an updated flyer. Other communities, actually all 3 of the communities, did a digital advertising campaign that was focused around their residents. So people that were outside of Chattanooga wouldn't see the advertisement for Chattanooga's expanded program. They wanted to drive traffic to their website. In some cases, we actually even provided extra images for their website. Actually, in all 3 cases, we provided images for their website so they could have those clear, easy to follow graphics that were very clear to their residents. Not only did each community have communications goals, meaning engagement with their website, engagement with their social media, but they also had operational goals that really refer to behavior change. So in Chattanooga, they have a subscription program, and they had 453 new households adopt their recycling program, and that was a 46% increase. Louisville really revamped their website, and what we saw that was really beneficial for that community partnership is, and really for all of them, is this increased communication with their marketing and communications team with the cities. I don't know if those listening in from the public sector, sometimes you don't have that strong relationship, or you have siloed relationships between your solid waste and recycling and sustainability departments and your marketing department. Really bridging that gap was an unanticipated benefit of the Community Partners program. And anytime you're reaching out for to add a new item, or really just reminding residents to recycle, you're going to see that increase in recyclables and interest in recycling. One of the tools in the community partner for our community partners that we offered was a video, and this was a minute-long video that we offered in both English and Spanish. And you'll see an example here from Washington, D.C. And it was the appropriate way to recycle your food service packaging items, letting residents know that these were new items in their program, and also encouraging common messages that they have that we all, encourage, as far as having your recyclables loose and without bags. And you'll see that not only was this a popular video with more than 15,000 views in English, you also see the Spanish video had 21,000 views. So they're able to reach out to the Hispanic community in a way that they were not previously doing. So Washington, D.C. had several goals, and they did want to drive, they actually did a full, in cooperation with their communications department, did a full recycling webpage called Zero Waste DC. And they saw the recycling guidelines page, where we were sending a lot of the traffic, had an increase of 102% over the same period last year in their previous website. They also really wanted to have a big focus on social media. They, as their department, were really ramping up social media communication. So they started with a new Facebook site that had about 100 followers, and by the end of the campaign had more than 1,600. And same thing with Twitter, started with basically no followers, and then has 675. So now they have an ongoing basis and followers that they can continue their recycling messages and continuing their composting and sustainability messages. So the community partners is one way to reach out, but at this time I'm going to turn it back to Lynn to wrap up and to talk about some other resources that we have for California.
Thank you very much, Marissa. Okay, so if you go to the next slide, I think one of the things we recognize, we're the Food Service Packaging Institute. We're there to work specifically for the food service packaging industry, and we know that we want to make sure, excuse me, more of our products are getting recycled and composted. We also very well recognize we probably could not have picked a worse time to try to introduce new materials into the recycling streams. Particularly, composting obviously is growing, but it's one of those things we recognize that there are a lot of hurdles. However, this is something that's been very important to us, and we see that there's real value outside just the food service packaging industry to recycle and compost these products. So we want to leave you with 3 very good reasons why you might want to consider recycling or composting food service packaging if you're thinking about it. Number 1, again, let's always keep in mind that, why are we recycling and composting in the first place? We want to provide valuable feedstocks back to those streams, and then frankly, it keeps it out of the landfill. It doesn't make sense to bury a valuable material that can then be turned back in and used in place of virgin materials, or be used as a soil amendment, for example. Number 2, and this is a perfect example specifically in California, it can assist the state specifically with some of their recycling and diversion goals, as well as some of the communities and counties within the state, because certainly we have seen quite a few different goals announced within again, at the state and local level. And then, I think one of the interesting things that we've seen with the outreach specifically that we've done in Louisville, in Washington, D.C., and in Chattanooga is it really does provide that opportunity to re-educate the residents on what to recycle and how to recycle, because we know that both quality and quantity is very important. And if this provides an opportunity, in adding new materials to go out and talk to your residents again and help to educate them, I think that's certainly beneficial. So one of the things that we've done specifically for the California market is to launch a brand new website called recyclefspinca.org. It's a very sexy name, I know. But, the bottom line is we wanted to take and encapsulate all the information that we have collected specifically on the California market, but also at that national level. And we are not going to walk you through the entire website, but I just want to give you a flavor for what the information that you can find here. And we've broken it out really based on the type of audience that you are, whether you're a food service operator, a community, whether you're a MRF, whether you're a composting or an AD facility operator, or whether you're really in that end market space. So briefly, let's take a quick look at those different sections. So if you're a food service operator, one of the things you may be doing is thinking about, okay, how could I recycle or compost more specifically in your store? Back of house composting and back of house recycling is far more prevalent than that front of store, that consumer facing packaging. And so one of the things that we did was actually develop this toolkit that really just outlines the 5 steps that are needed to really put together a program where you could collect those takeout containers and cups and other items specifically in the front of the store. So those are listed there specifically. So if you're a food service operator, that's a really great resource for you. So specifically for communities, if you go to the next slide, we have a ton of material here, but I just wanted to focus on one in particular. There is our resident education toolkit, and one of the things we've done is really taken the different pieces like Marissa was just talking about. So for example, we have a flyer that we have developed using all of the learnings that we gathered in some of the research, and you could easily personalize your own flyer, and we have graphics that you can use, so you can download lots of images. Marissa talked about how important it is to really show them visually what you accept or what perhaps you don't accept, and so those images are available for free for you to download. Also, the survey that Marissa talked about, the full results of that resident survey that we did are available. And then one of the other things that we did is we put together a best practices manual that really talks about different ways to talk about recycling of food service packaging. And that's not only just the information we found from the residents. We did a lot of research and looked at how other people are communicating and tried to identify what some of those best practices are. So if you do want to talk about recycling or composting specifically in your communities, some great resources for you there. So if you're a material recovery facility, again, we've tried to tailor a lot of really good information specifically for you. So for example, we have something like a couple of pages of an information sheet that really kind of walks you through, gives you an idea from a volume standpoint, how much you can expect. I think that's one of the interesting things is that when you think about food service packaging, because it is such a part of so many people's daily lives, the MRFs will say, oh, well, I don't want to take it because I'm just going to get inundated by this material. They're just expecting that they're going to have tons and tons. And in reality, it really is such a very small part of the waste stream. I know that California specifically does not have data on food service packaging in the waste stream, but I can tell you that at the EPA level, they do track some of that information. And according to the EPA, you're talking about 1 to 3% of municipal solid waste discards or food service packaging. So it's a very, very small percentage. But we have details on sorting, we have details on volumes, we have details on what kind of bales you can look at specifically for your food service packaging. So lots of great resources specifically for the MRFs. And then we do have an overview on that study that I mentioned from 2016 on acceptance, both by communities and by the MRFs. So that's in there as well. If you're looking specifically at composting food service packaging, there's a great section specifically geared towards composters and AD facility operators. Again, lots of information specifically on food service packaging. There is information we kind of talked a bit earlier when I was talking about what we found out in terms of residential collection of organics and the composters in the United States. An overview of that study is available on the website here. And again, more targeted information for composters in that section. And then finally, the last section that we have is specifically geared around end markets, because we know that without end markets, the material recovery facilities aren't going to be able to accept the material, and therefore the communities won't either. And so one of the things that we've really tried to do, and we continue to do because we know it's so important, is try to identify where those end markets are. We know that globally, it's a global industry. It might be domestic, it might go export. Certainly in California, a lot of that material is going export, or it was going export, and now we need to find new homes for it. So one of the things that we developed was really an end market map of end markets that we've either confirmed or we've been talking to, or there's a potential that they would be able to accept bales specifically with food service packaging. And that's broken out specifically by bale type. So if it's an OCC bale, if it's a mixed plastics bale, it might be a carton bale, no matter what the bale type is, it's divided in that form or fashion. So if you're specifically looking for end markets for bales with food service packaging included, do take a look at that end market map. The other thing that I would encourage you to do is, if you have questions specifically on the end markets for food service packaging, because that's such a big part of the work that we're doing right now, I would encourage you to reach out, because one of the things that we've been doing is really trying to make sure that people understand that we're there to help connect the dots if and when necessary. So if you could do that, I would certainly appreciate it. And with that, I think we'll turn it back to questions. So if you have any questions, I would encourage you to make sure that you put them in the little question box over on the right-hand side. Marissa, could you go to the final slide, please? Perfect. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thanks, Lynn, Bob, and Marissa. Fantastic presentations. So for the first question, it says, I didn't see a photo of the plastic clamshell in the flyer that was selected by survey respondents. And I'm assuming the question is there a reason why that wasn't in there?
So that's a good question. The photo was actually in the question. That the slide that you saw was a representation of it. It was interesting. I can go back to that slide in a moment, or that flyer. That particular clamshell was featured on this one. So there was one where the clamshell was actually featured specifically here, and then but this was still clearest when you're talking about the plastic category. So there were references, obviously if this was clearer, that this was still the references of other plastic items were more clear to the resident than the other items. Does that answer that question?
Well, we'll keep going, and then if there's more questions surrounding that, then we'll get to. What about the jurisdictions that want the pizza box to go in the compost stream now and not recycling?
I'll take that one. I think we know that recycling and composting is local. And, to be honest with you, we think, the best of both worlds would be you have a recyclable and compostable item. So in the case of a pizza box, it really is going to depend on that local jurisdiction and completely up to them. We just either recycling or composting is certainly far more preferred than it going to the landfill. So leave it up to the jurisdiction.
And this is
great.
And this is Bob. I would tag along that we advise clean and empty phrase when referencing pizza boxes in the recycling bin, clean and empty.
Perfect. Will we be able to get copies of these slides? The video and the slides will be sent out this week. So yes, to all attendees. Next question, is there any movement to line the paper products with compostable liners instead of plastic so that more composting facilities can accept them?
This is Lynn. I'll certainly take that one. Yes, I would say that if you take a look at the traditional items that are used in food service packaging, paper items, you know, they might be lined in some cases, like a paper cup, for example, would have a plastic lining for performance reasons. I will tell you that there is an awful lot of research going into that. So you can, I would say you can expect changes to our traditional paper cup in the next couple of years. I just don't have a number I can't tell you a specific number. What I can tell you is when the industry moved from a wax-coated cup to a plastic PE-coated cup, it took the industry roughly 10 to 15 years to make that change. Given the environment today, I cannot imagine that it's going to take that long. But frankly, it's just an issue. It's an R&D issue and finding the right coating that's available. Certainly, right now there are already PLA coated items available that could be introduced into the composting facility. So that's already in the marketplace today.
Great. Next question, what percentage of the total recyclables waste stream does FSP contain?
I'm not sure I understand that question, so I might go back to the asker at a later date. Again, food service packaging, again, it's such a small percentage. I can tell you, just to give you an example, one of the things that we've done, and you'll find on that recyclefspinca.org website, is we've actually estimated what happens when you add food service packaging to traditional bales. And so, for example, in a mixed paper bale, a traditional mixed paper bale, if you add food service packaging to it, you're talking about 3% of the total mixed paper bale would be food service packaging, just to give you an idea. So let's go to the next question, and I'm happy to follow up with the asker afterwards if he'd like more details.
Perfect. How are contentious issues, disagreements resolved that arise between your organization and national to local governments, industry sources, and end markets regarding recycling, composting?
Well, I guess that's a good question. It is a good question. I'm not sure how to answer it exactly. You know, to be honest with you, we want to be at the table and we want to have those conversations. You know what? Here's the thing: is that we have our, goals, but we also understand that national and local governments, industries, et cetera, have their own goals. So how can we come together to talk about these to find beneficial, answers for all of those different groups? So, but certainly, they do tend to flow through FPI because it's the industry's trade association. And, if there are specific issues or questions that people have, I certainly would welcome them.
Great. What developments are expected in compostable plastic food packaging?
Well, there's always R&D going in the food service packaging industry, and that's what's really exciting. Today, more than ever, you have so many different options for food service packaging. So it really just depends on what the folks are looking for. Food service packaging is designed to support the needs of the food service operators. So as more food service operators come to the packaging industry and say, hey, we have a need for X, the packaging industry will work to design those new products. So I think in terms of specifically compostable plastic food packaging, I think one of the things that you'll probably see are different types of feedstocks. So if you think about traditionally what we've seen is the primary resin used is PLA. So maybe it's not going to be a PLA item, maybe it's made from some other type, or maybe the feedstock is slightly different. So I think you'll continue to see more and more items. In the compostable area, I would say it's not necessarily just, development specifically in plastics, but obviously we're seeing more and more use of different types of natural fibers. So whether it's, historically it's been, tree fibers or bagasse, but certainly things like wheat straw coming more into the marketplace. And, while those items have historically been made, perhaps internationally and then brought in here, we certainly know that there's interest in bringing some of that manufacturing back domestically.
What are the best practices you've seen on partner websites?
Well, A lot of our community partner websites were very text heavy when they started the community partnership, and so we were able to help them to simplify their websites a little bit and to use those images. What we've seen is basically, as far as best practices, is really that ongoing communication with their communications and marketing department, and to not just stop after the community partner advertising campaign, but to continue that ongoing relationship and keeping the websites updated. You want to keep them fresh. You want to have information that your website is where you live. And if you're always going to want to paint, or maybe you don't want to paint the walls, or you want to paint the walls of your home and keep it clean. Same thing with the website. That's your one opportunity for that. Complete message control. And then secondarily, what we've seen is partners that are really communities in general that have an ongoing conversation with their residents through social media, have had more informed residents about and less contamination. So looking at the opportunities that are available and the resources that you have in your back pocket. We also understand that some communities have less resources, and so it's kind of looking at your recycling outreach holistically, and what can we do with the resources that we have to really make an impact in our communications.
Thanks. Any plans to address the limited recyclability, compostability of liquid containers such as Tetra Pak?
This is Lynn. I'll take that one. To be completely honest with you, that's not an item that we would put in that food service packaging category. Traditionally, food service packaging is filled at the point of sale. So if you think about like beverage containers, you're talking about cups in our case. I would encourage you, if you have questions specifically about liquid containers like Tetra Paks, to contact the Carton Council. That's the organization that has been doing a lot of work specifically on recyclability and compostability of cartons.
Great, thank you. Paralysis is a prevalent solution in the UK, downplayed in the US. Comments? Example, Enval microwave-driven paralysis for plastic aluminum laminate package conversion.
I'll take that one as well. Absolutely. If you take a look at what are the different end markets for recyclable materials, if you're talking specifically something like polystyrene, there are some great emerging opportunities to recycle those items. In the case specifically on the West Coast, you may be familiar with Agilix, which is a company that just opened specifically recycling polystyrene, both rigid and foam, and they're actually turning it back into the styrene monomer that could then end up being reused and put back into food service packaging. So that is certainly an option. And if you have questions specifically on foam recycling, we actually have a whole separate organization and a website that I would encourage you to check out. It's recyclefoam.org.
Does the FPI do research on washable, reusable food service packaging or just single-use food service packaging?
So the charge for FPI is really focused specifically on single-use food service packaging, so that is the focus of a lot of our efforts. Having said that, there has certainly been a growing interest in reusable items, and we have actually developed some resources specifically for food service operators. So as they're thinking about making a change, they take all the various considerations into making that change. So, and you find that on fpi.org. Go ahead.
We have a couple questions left and 2 minutes left. So There's one comment. EPA may nationally report that FSP is only 1 to 3% of the waste stream, but this number misses the environmental impact on our waterways, bays, oceans, and wildlife when they escape collection. FPI should also be concerned with the impact of their products on the environment, not just ending up in a landfill. So it's more of a comment.
I would absolutely 100%. I will say we 100% agree with that. We absolutely do not want to see our products end up on land or in waterways, and we are very happy to support efforts that are out there to try to make sure that those products don't do that. And we understand that it's very important to do that. So we'd love to talk to anybody about that in the future.
Great. How do you approach bioplastics with community education? A lot of those items are labeled compostable, but our compost facilities do not accept them.
Yeah, and that's a challenge, and I think that's one of the things when we think about from a community partnership standpoint. You know, Marissa shared that we worked in Chattanooga, DC, and Louisville. Frankly, we're hoping to work with a city in California sometime soon. Please speak up anytime you want to work with us. And I think one of the things that we'd like to see is what are the opportunities when you have both recycling and composting? How do you, what best practices can you do to make sure those products end up in the correct stream?
Great. So we have so many more questions, and we actually need to end. So perhaps we can follow up with those that have already asked questions. There's just one last one here. Have you seen any good mobile apps that support better quality messaging?
Oh, that's a good one. I don't have an answer. Marissa, do you have something?
I do. There's a couple of different apps that are common. The Recycle Coach and Recollect are great as far as the what goes where, and I like it. I like it even for food service packaging items because the cities get to have control over the message. So you have an image, you have specific instructions on how to recycle or compost a certain item, and residents find out via a search, so they can put in paper cup, and then it would say, you know, put this in your recycle bin, or whatever the community does. So I like those. There's new ones that are popping up all the time, but those ones are good.
Great. All right. So with that, there will be a survey along with a video of the webinar emailed to you this week. So look out for that. And don't forget to join FPI for the after party at the exhibitors reception at the CRA conference coming up in July. So with that, thank you so much for attending the webinar. We hope it was useful, and have a great rest of the week. Take care.